Well, what's interesting too is like even that behavior, when I started nursing, that behavior is not even acceptable in the psychiatric ward.
Wow.
And it's prevalent on the street. Because if that person ends up in the psychiatric ward and they're acting like that, they are not going to be conscious. Well, not unconscious, but they're going to be medicated and possibly 5-point restrained.
Wow.
It's where they throw the football around. They play flag football, but it's like a huge parking lot. It's in between two big parking lots, and it's like, that's their outdoors time, you know? It's like, I mean, it's better than being inside in a hallway, but it's like, we're
Right.
trying to help these people mentally, and we have them caged in, eating food that's maybe good for them, maybe better than, you know, the homeless patients, maybe they're eating better.
And you get a concrete jungle at best when you're outside. That's not
like,
nature.
What if we had something like that? I don't know how you would even start something like that, but
how do you strike that balance instead of saying, okay, you have one bad apple, we're taking it away from the whole bunch?
I think in the grand scheme, it comes down to money. It comes down to that wouldn't make us as much money. When you have a psychiatric floor, it's a hospital. It's not a psychiatric hospital. It's a hospital. And 2 floors are dedicated to psychiatric.
Right.
So when you have a patient in the hospital, that's buco bucks from the insurance company, mostly Medicaid. And it's just a revolving paycheck. And it's like, well, as long as you keep these beds full, we're going to get our money and we'll give you your cut and we're all going to be happy except for the patients. The patients are the ones that are going to suffer. So if you had a setting like that, who would make money off of that?
Welcome to the Rich Dog, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me Cara Dennis, a Psych and Addictions Nurse, an Eastern Catholic, and a fresh YouTuber.
Yes.
Cara, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, fresh YouTuber in the sense that you just started this YouTube channel, and
yeah, about a week or 2 ago is when I made my first video that kind of went viral.
Yeah,
which I knew it would, because the reason I made that video of evidence of the crucifixion, it's a 1 minute. I think it's just like a 1 minute clip, and so it has the shroud of Turin, the nails, the spear, the sponge, all these holy relics that we have in our church. So what prompted me to make that short was that I saw a short, and it was beautiful but completely false. You know, they had Jesus's nails, and they were not the nails. They were nails. They were not his nails. They had Jesus's own Bible, his personal Bible, which did not exist.
I was gonna say, he might have had some OT scrolls, but
had some random. But it was a book. It was a black book, and it was like his sandals.
A codex before codices were invented.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay, there was not a single thing in there that was true, and the premise was good.
Yes,
but I'm like, let's make this with real things. You know, what about the Shroud of Turin? You know, what about all these things that we have? So that's what prompted me to make it.
See, you're kinder than I am. I would argue that's not beautiful.
It was a beautiful concept that brought forth the video that I made. So we'll go with that.
Yes. Well, thanks be to God for it.
And it went viral. And like in 24 hours, I got 38 subscribers and over 800 views of this video that I wasn't sure if I was going to make a channel or not. And I'm like, well, people are looking for this. People are looking for truth. So
is it fair to say that this is like a faith-based channel?
Oh, absolutely. Light from light, which is from the creed. It's something we share both, a verse in the creed that we both share, East and West.
And West, yeah, unifying.
So it's more from an Eastern Catholic perspective. When I put Roman Catholic things, you know, I'll have them labeled. So, you know, a lot of tensions in the East when you mix the two together, you know, like, which is understandable, because from the perspective of an Eastern Catholic, if you're doing Roman Catholic things in an Eastern church, you're saying, it's almost like saying, like, that's not Catholic enough to be Eastern. You got to add these Western things. And that's that's why people get offended on the East when you know, have rosary groups in an Eastern Catholic church, or, you know, the way of the cross. It's like, well, what about our traditions? What about our activists? What about, you know, our Holy Week, which is filled with hours of services and prostrations? And it's like, well, that makes sense. You know, you're sort of saying like those aren't Catholic enough. Let's replace them with the Roman Catholic things, you know. So I don't like to mix the two, but I will have some Roman Catholic things as well. But it'll be more from an Eastern perspective.
Right. Well, I'm really glad that you just brought that up. Like, I'm very blessed because I'm good friends with my man Dennis G, who he and I co-founded East to West Theology
Right,
together, which is
right,
another YouTube channel out there I highly recommend people check out, of course. And you know, our whole mission with that is to breathe with both lungs of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic
right,
Church, and to
right,
have, you know, basically equal say of an Eastern and a Western perspective, so that people have that ability. And so I understand what you're saying 100%.
right,
I remember when he told me years ago, he said, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do,
right,
but when in Constantinople, do it as the Constantinopolians do.
right, right.
And I was like, that just makes so much
It makes
sense.
perfect sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Because you dilute a culture too. When you just start mixing things all together, it sort of dilutes it, and then it's like there's almost no culture. But I also want to include Roman Catholic things because, you know, we're in the West. You know, I'm not living in an Eastern country. We're living in the West. My children are growing up in a Western culture.
Sure.
So, you know, when I personally pray the Rosary, it's more like the prayer of the Theotokos. But when we pray as a family, we do it the Roman way. And my husband is Roman Catholic, so we pray it the Roman Catholic way. I want my children to know the Roman Catholic Rosary. It's a Roman Catholic devotion. I personally mix it when I'm by myself in the car, you know, at home, you know. Then
Sure.
it's sort of a mixture. It's 99% Eastern, but I swap the Our Father and the Hail Marys. The Our Father is actually supposed to be at the end when you do the prayer rule of the Theotokos from the Eastern perspective. So I do it more the Roman way in terms of that, but everything else is like, you know. So the Eastern Rosary, the prayer rule of the Theotokos, you would do like the Trisagion prayers, like we do at the end of Divine Liturgy in the Eastern Rite. So it starts with the Heavenly King, and it goes down all the way to the Our Father, the Come Let Us Bow, the Psalm 50 and the Creed, and then I go into, you know, the Rosary aspect of it. There's decades. There's 15 decades in the prayer rule. Sometimes I do my own set of, you know, decades, you know, depending on the season. Because the other issue with the Rosary in the East is that you're praying things out of season. You know, in the East, we're very seasonal. When it's Lent, we are very fully embraced in the Passion of Christ. So to pray glorious mysteries on a Wednesday in the Eastern Catholic Church, you know, it's just not right. Like it doesn't fit the mold. You know, it makes sense in the West. But in the East, you know, Wednesday is a penitential day, you know, and Friday is a very penitential day. And in the West, you know, the Mother of God is Saturday. For us, the Mother of God is Wednesday, along with the cross, you know. So it's like trying to get it seasonal. So, for example, right now, you know, I'll do, once Lent officially starts, once the Great Fast officially starts, if I do the Rosary, it'll be the Passion, the Sorrowful Mysteries, you know. So to do, you know, if it's not on a Sunday, if it's on a Sunday, I can still do the Glorious. It doesn't feel
Right.
out of
Because it's always a mini
place.
Easter on a Sunday.
Right. It's always a mini Easter. So there's a calendar issue. It's just a different perspective. You know, when you're in Lent, you're in Lent. You know, when you're in the Paschal season, the thought of doing sorrowful mysteries on a Friday during the Paschal season, like it's just out of place. Like you're in this festal season and now you're penitent again when we just did that for 40 days. No, we're in the joyful time. So I do it that way, you know, to stay within season.
I love
So,
that. Well, I mean, and what I think some people may struggle with if they're hearing something like that and they're like, how would I, you know, conform my life to that, or show more reverence or respect for something like that? the lowest common denominator of everything you just shared is that it requires intentionality.
Yes.
A lot of
Yeah.
people just don't have that at all.
Right.
Like, forget following what's done in the West as opposed to what's going on in the East. They're not even doing anything.
Right.
So let's add value to that, right? Like, so what's the solution there? Like, here at the Rich Dawn, we explore what's needed for a healthy and thriving culture.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the need to foster a culture without diluting it.
Right.
I would say, obviously, anybody that hears that and that, is giving Americanism a fair shake, that's almost like antithetical to Americanism, because they're all about this melting pot.
Right.
So how would you respond to that? Or how would you say, like, hey, like, maybe invite people into being more intentional about their lives?
Yeah, the melting pot. So the melting pot can be good, but it's almost, how do I explain? So whatever culture you're living in, like, it's not to say that you shouldn't do like the Jesus prayer if you're a Roman Roman Catholic. It's not to say you shouldn't do the rosary if you're an Eastern Catholic, but do it in a way that makes sense for your culture. Like what I was saying with the rosary, like if you're going to do it in the right season, do it according to the Eastern calendar. If you're going to do the Jesus prayer, in the West, like, you're not going to do it as a parish as if this is more important than the rosary. Like, it would be unheard of to be like, oh, instead of rosary group today, we're going to do the Jesus prayer, like the old ladies would be like, what are you talking about? I'm leaving. So like, to have it, you have to like see the value of everything and place it properly to not dilute it. I don't know. I don't really know how else to explain it. But I think preserving culture is very important. The melting pot can very much dilute, and it's like, oh, this one's higher than this one, this one's higher than this one. And it's like, well, in the church, it's not that one is higher than the other. It's just that everything has its place.
Yeah, no, and I think that we need to be, one reason from my perspective as a historical Western when doing that project was to say, look, 99% of Catholicism is Western right now.
Right.
1% is Eastern.
Right.
We need to really, really treasure
exactly
what's there in the East.
That's a bit, that's
and
probably
allow that
why
to grow.
It's not as much of a problem in the Roman Rite. To like, if they were going to do, say an akathist to the Mother of God, it wouldn't really be an insult to Roman Catholicism to do an akathist. It would be we would take it as a compliment, like you're revering the akathist. But if you do a Roman Catholic practice, because it's happened so much that it's like the Eastern practices have been sort of like persecuted in a way or oppressed, like that's not Catholic enough. And I've never experienced this. I don't know if this is a past thing. This is what I'm getting from other Eastern Catholics, that it's like, well, they get hurt by it, because it's like, well, we're losing all of our, does anybody even do the akathist anymore? Does anybody know what an akathist is? And it's,
well, what is it?
So it's similar to, there's a Roman Catholic sort of equivalent, and it's the litany to the Mother of God. It would probably be an equivalent to that.
Okay. And
it would be kind of equivalent also to the joyful mysteries of the Rosary. It goes through all the joyful mysteries, but in 12 like stasis, 12 sections. And then the 13th is the first one repeated. And it's just a litany of all of her titles. And it ends
like
with
stanzas.
It's like stanzas, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we call them stases.
Stases. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's Greek for probably whatever stanza.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm not sure. Segment, I guess. Yeah. I'm not sure.
That's awesome.
But
poetic quips.
That's right. And I think there's 12 titles of hers in each stasis. And then there's a prayer before, a catechon, I don't know what the other one is. That might be also a stasis. I'm not exactly sure what that's called, but there's another prayer after. But they're mostly the joyful mysteries. So a lot of people do them at Christmas time. Some people do them on Wednesday. There's a parish that I used to go to in Canada. They did it every Sunday, at the end of every Sunday liturgy.
Nice.
They would end liturgy, and whoever wanted to stay for the akathist, they would have the akathist. And then it was very beautiful.
I love that.
So
I love that. Yeah, well, thank you for
I'm not
sharing.
sure if I answered your question.
No, I think you did. Well, I mean, yeah, you did because you're saying, look, culture is important. We have to preserve it,
Yeah.
and right things in the right place,
Right.
right
That's
setting,
that's
a
that's the thing.
setting.
Yep.
Yeah, which I think is part and parcel to beauty,
Right.
right? Because it's there's a fittingness
Right.
to that. And then in terms of, yeah, just the melting pot, it's like I don't know what to do about that. It is what it is. It's there. But I think that again, the answer is intentionality. You have to be
Right.
intentional about these things. And your point's well taken. I think that in the West, for people that just like dominate a culture, they take it almost for granted
Right.
that that things are the way that they are, and maybe they shouldn't do that because there's a lot to be thankful for.
Right.
If you happen to just be in a culture that's intentional, like someone had to put in some effort to get it there.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
And it could go away.
And I know after liturgy this past Sunday, our priest was talking about like there was a priest that was receiving all these statues for his parish from like parishioners as gifts, and it's like, well, we don't really have statues in our churches, not because we don't believe in them, but because that's
Well, I
just
certainly
not
believe in
our
icons.
culture. Exactly. But what about our icons? It's saying that
Right.
statues are above the icons, and the icons are, we say they're written, they're not painted, they're considered written because every detail has a particular meaning. Like, for example, you start with the dark colors and then you go to the lighter colors and you put all the darker colors first. And then the next layer is the lighter colors until the very brightest are the very last ones. And it symbolizes going from darkness to light. His long nose. You always see Christ with a very long nose, and that is symbolic for his long suffering. And he has one large eye, one small eye. The large eye is his eye of mercy. The small eye is his eye of judgment. So it's like it's not beautiful in the way that a painting is, because of the symmetry is what makes a painting beautiful. But in iconography, the symbolism is what makes it beautiful. And so many people couldn't read, so they would look at the icon. They knew the symbology. They were taught the symbology orally, and they could read the icon. So when you place that with a statue, it's like, well, yeah, that's a beautiful statue, but you're replacing something very sacred with something else that's sacred that's out of place,
Yeah.
So it's sacred in a different way.
Sure. And at the end of the day, I can sense how, the associations that come with this versus bringing something different into the setting can be perceived as like, that doesn't line up with our culture.
Right, exactly.
That doesn't line up with our expression, our way of doing things. I would just argue, like, if I found myself embroiled in a controversy like that, like, like, look, we're not here to measure up to your understanding, like anyone's understanding of what being Catholic is. We just do have our way of being Catholic, and that's how it's going to be. Right.
And I'm in a lot of like Eastern groups on Facebook, and sometimes I have to take a step back, with all the bickering about, East and West, and that's a Latinization, that's this, that's that, this is not right. It's like, I'm so thankful that like the biggest concern in these groups is like statues and the rosary. Like,
that's okay. I mean, don't make them into the idol.
Yes, exactly.
Because anyone could do that. Be like, you're missing the forest for the trees, but at least
the worst thing that's happening in your church is there's a statue, you're doing pretty well. You're doing pretty well.
Right.
So yeah. Right. When you look at the grand scheme of things, the things that we bicker about on social media are pretty comical.
Yes.
There's much bigger things going on in the world, and I'm thankful they haven't touched our church just yet.
Thanks be to God. Yeah, I'll take statues versus iconography over sacking Constantinople.
Paganism
and people. Well, no, I mean I was thinking of an interfaith conflict where people are shedding blood. It's like, that's over the top, and but unfortunately these things happen over the centuries, and it could happen in hours, but at the end of the day, what unites us is what matters the most. Like, what would you say, what do you love about being Eastern Catholic?
That's a good question. I just know, so I am 1/4 Ukrainian. I'm 4th generation. My great-grandparents, I believe, met on the boat from Ukraine to America.
Sorry about what's going on, by the way.
But yeah, for sure. And so I'm not sure. We're not sure if my grandmother was Ukrainian Catholic or Ukrainian Orthodox. But then she married a Lutheran, but they raised my mother Roman Catholic. So they were going to the Roman Catholic. So I didn't discover, and then my father converted to Roman Catholicism when I was 4 from Protestantism. And he was baptized when I was 4. And he was the one that taught me the rosary and all these things. And made sure we went to church on Sunday and all that. And where was I going with that?
What you love about being Eastern.
What I love about being Eastern. Yes. So I came into it. I was almost 20 years old when I first went to our Ukrainian parish. And I've actually been there ever since. I'm 42 now. So that's a little over 22 years.
Over half your life.
So over half
you were
my
there.
life for sure.
Yeah.
And I can't even say what I loved about it. I just, in Lent with the prostrations and the prayers, just like, it just feels like you're back in time, in a Christian church from like the early church sometimes, and our church isn't the most beautiful. It's not the most decorated, but it's like the services are so rich and they're so reverent towards the Eucharist. Everybody's facing the Eucharist. And I remember just going to the Latin Mass for the first time. I think it was right before I started going Ukrainian, and like reading the words on the left in English. And I'm like, boy, I felt cheated, like this is so poetic and beautiful. Why didn't we just switch to this? And then I discovered the East, and that was the equivalent to me. It was like these rich prayers that I feel like I've been missing out on all my life. It's like they haven't changed in the East. Like they still have these rich prayers. And I can't explain it. I just felt like I was home when I went there. After about a week, I'm like, this is where I want to be, and these are my people by blood. These are my people by faith as well.
It's like you came back home.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
you found your roots.
So when I was either 20, I believe I was 20. I might have been 21, but I think I was 20 when I officially became Ukrainian Catholic.
Thanks, pretty good.
We'll have to check the book.
Sure. Well, we all know the church. They're very second to none at record keeping, it seems. They've got the receipts. So, well, that's really, really cool. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I completely echo what you're saying too, about the importance of culture and the importance of intentionality and preservation, tradition.
Mm-hmm. Tradition.
It was being a Latin Mass Catholic myself in that spirit that I started East West Theology with Dennis, because it was like I was actually coming at it from almost like, I don't want to say having like a chip on your shoulder, but like, again, I echo what you just said. Like it almost feels like it's like, whoa, like how has this been being kept from us?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very natural response, because it's like, for me growing up in the West, you grow up in the Novus Ordo.
Yes.
And then you discover the Latin Mass and you're like, this never got mentioned even once.
I didn't know that it existed until I was almost 20. I didn't even know there was such thing as a Latin
until
Mass.
I was in my 20s.
Right.
And I'm like you never even mentioned its existence, even as a little historical anecdote.
Right. Yeah.
Let alone that, like, we still have a right to worship the way that our ancestors did.
Yeah.
Like, this is sacred.
Yeah.
This is our literal connection to our ancestors.
Right.
And so I was, when we kind of came together, I was representing that while he was representing the East.
Right.
So in that weird way, it's almost like we were both coming from like a 1% perspective, because when you think about it from a Latin Mass perspective, it's kind of similar in that way.
Right.
So I really, really empathize with what you're saying. And I don't know. I mean, you can't beat beauty.
Yeah.
When it's just that much, when it's just so beautiful, you're just like, why would I want anything less?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so thank you for representing that. Now, Cara, you also mentioned how, by trade, you're in the medical profession.
Yes.
And, so you're a psych addictions nurse. I know one thing, we probably should have said this at the very beginning, but that's okay. It'll be in the description or in the title. But like one major theme of what we want to talk about in this episode is, your experience in that role. I'm sure as a faith-based woman will underlay in there somewhere, if not throughout,
Hmm.
but also especially just within the context of um, the post-COVID world that we find ourselves in.
Right.
Like, you can speak to, what's going on in the medical field and how that relates to culture, almost like before, during, and then now here after
Right.
COVID. I know you had mentioned to me there's some things that can be broached on this, and I appreciate you coming on to talk about it. So where should we begin?
So I could start with how I got into it, maybe.
Sure.
So we mentioned that, well, I guess not on the podcast, but we mentioned that me and my husband met at work at a group home for the developmentally disabled adults. And that's where I started piquing my interest in nursing. I was talking to the nurse because there was a nurse that oversaw several houses. And she really encouraged me. And the house we were at had a lot of psychiatric conditions. And so I really fell in love with psychiatric nursing, psychiatric sort of care. There's psychiatric in our family. And I just got really interested in that. And so I actually went into nursing school with the intention of becoming a psych nurse. Throughout, I started, thinking, oh, maybe surgical, maybe this. And, but then when I did my psych rotation, it was one of the very last rotations I did. I just knew that that's where I was meant to be. Like, I was like, there's nothing else I want to do more than the psych nursing. And they really discourage you from going straight into it as a graduate nurse. They're like, no, you really got to get your 1-year med surge. And so I just ignored that. And I'm glad I did, because now, I know so much. Ooh, I keep hitting this mic.
Oh, that's okay.
I want to know my trade front and back so that I'm not dealing with, always learning. People, there's some nurses that just love to hop and they want all the experience in the world. And that's great. That's not for me, though. Like, for me, I want to know the little things, the computer things and the little details so that I can do those on autopilot and I can give my focus to the patient. And with psychiatric and addictions nursing, like, that's most of the nursing, is that it's called TCT, therapeutic communication techniques. And it's really just therapeutic talking. I mean, that's really
Right.
all it
Talk
is.
therapy.
Talk therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, we do
Just
that in
let
life
them,
coaching.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really my place. And then it just started, I started on the psychiatric floor inpatient, and I started with another girl that I kind of knew from nursing school, but we really met more at work. And we both were like, this, we're going to retire from here. Like, we both loved it so much. And then as time went on, it started degenerating. It started, disintegrating. The older nurses were getting upset about the direction. It was starting to get more dangerous. Like, we were starting to have more Medicaid, more rapids, as they call them, more crises with restraints and medication. And I'm just like, this is a little too much,
Why do you think that is?
dangerous.
Is it just that the society is degrading more?
I think it's just a sign that the whole culture is degrading. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what it seems like, because now I go on X, I go on Facebook, and the things I see on there, I'm like, that belongs inpatient. I've seen all this stuff inpatient, and now it's on the streets as a normal activity post-COVID.
Wow.
The things it was very rare for us to do a restraint. I think my first year we did like 2 restraints, maybe 3, but it was the same woman. It was one woman.
Sure.
And it was
offender.
like a repeat offender. She was older. She had been sick for a long time. This was kind of her lifestyle, unfortunately, in and out, unfortunately. And the older nurses are saying, what is going on? And then, like, us new nurses are like, what are you talking about? This is great. Like, it doesn't happen very often. I don't know. We were expecting from Hollywood, Hollywood psych ward, where it's like happening all the time. And then fast forward to post-COVID, and that's exactly what it is. That's exactly, it was.
That happens all the time now.
So I was there for 3 years. I was there 2 years or a year on the floor. And then I switched to psychiatric emergency room because it was 12 hours and my son was about to start preschool. And it was 8 hours on the floor. And I'm like, I'm never going to see my son working 3 to 11. He's going to be in preschool, and then he's going to come home and I'm going to go to work, So I went to the psychiatric emergency room, and that was about the same, but a little more rough because they're raw off the street, being brought in by police and whatever. But then it just started getting a little too dangerous, and the regulations were getting a little more lax. People were like leaving the field, which is making so there's more newbies. Before it was like we had all these solid foundations of people that have been in this for 30 years, 20 years, 40 years even. I think we had a couple
Just
of
ninjas at
yes.
like
And
redirection.
we didn't even have to restrain people because they were so good at redirecting.
Mm-hmm.
There was peace on the floor. And then when that generation retired, it just kind of fell apart. It just wasn't safe anymore. So I left and I went to addictions. So my friend that I was talking about, she went to addictions, and I asked, how is this? I went to the jail, which it had its own struggles. The inmates were not the problem.
No kidding.
The way that the medical team was run was the problem.
So
And
bureaucracy, maybe.
very much, yes, yes. And it was a huge liability. It wasn't physically dangerous like psych was becoming, but it was a huge liability, like a legal liability. And I knew a nurse that was still, I think, currently mixed up in a legal issue that he just kind of got thrown under the bus for. So I was like, okay, I'm not staying here. So I was only there about 4 months. And then I went into addictions, and so far that's been going pretty well. It's degenerated a little bit, but not nearly the extent of psychiatric. But it could be the area that it's in. It's inner city, and so that's possible. And the addictions is in, more of a suburban area. It's a different hospital. So that could be part of it, but we also don't tolerate that behavior. People are trying to recover from addictions, so you can't be acting like that on the floor. So they get security in those. So that's a different perspective.
Yeah.
If something happens, me and my friend are all out there in the hallway ready to break up a fight, and they're like, no, don't do that. This is not a psychiatric floor. Like,
right.
We're actually discouraged from intervening. Like, no, you just kick them out. Like, we don't have that behavior here. This isn't the same mentality. So it was a learning curve.
No, that makes sense, because they ought to be mentally healthy enough to know better, and therefore they should be more responsible for their behavior, and they have to learn the negative consequence that you're out of here.
Right.
If that happens.
Exactly.
If you're dealing with somebody that's like mentally incapacitated.
Right. They get transferred to my old job because it's only 10 minutes down the road.
Well, there you go.
So that's where they typically go.
Yeah. And they get a little bit more hand holding because they're not necessarily as personally culpable.
Exactly.
Potentially, depending on the level of the incapacitation.
Yeah, it's not always the case.
Makes sense how those would be two totally different philosophies.
Yeah, so it was quite a learning curve switching, but I do like it better. There's a lot more therapeutic communication. I ended up getting kind of bumped out because a lot of the hospital units closed. I had only been there for 4 years at that time, and I had just gotten to day shift. So I was low senior on day shift, so I got the X.
Yeah, last in, first out.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to my old job thinking, and a lot of things had changed for the better, but it got so dangerous. It was much more dangerous than I had realized. And I was only there about 4 months, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. And I found out a woman had her hip broken, a nurse in her 50s, not elderly by any means. But she had her hip broken by a patient. I'm like, yeah, I can't have my hip broken. I can't. Right. I got 4 children. I can't be doing this. So I ended up leaving, and it was the greatest blessing because I was able. So my friend was the manager where I'm at now. She was able to get me in per diem, which is, just like a substitute. And so my husband went to work full time rather than me working full time, and our whole household ended up just in order. Everything, we were struggling. I was working. I just wanted to be home. He was at home. He wanted to be working. If there was overtime, I wasn't taking it. And he's like, but if that was me, I would be taking it. And it's like, we were just in each other's roles, and it was so reversed. Feminism has lied to us very greatly.
Well, I'm very thankful that you have the humility to acknowledge that, because obviously it's a cautious thing for, especially another guy, to just broach that subject.
Right.
But yeah, it's almost like transgender.
It was. It was.
in the
It was every.
culture.
It was a role reversal that just. It was unnatural for both of us, and we were both so unhappy. But we were just like, this is just what we chose, so we just kept going at it. And it's like, well, why do we have to just keep going at it? Like, why don't we just switch it back? You know? And we did, and everything fell into place. Now we're homeschooling. The kids are so happy. The dog's happier because I'm his person. So, but like just being home with the kids more is just, I wish I had done it much earlier, but it happened in God's time. But yeah,
Right.
it's very different.
What a journey.
Yeah, it was quite a journey.
And where was, I think we got like implicitly a bit of like your faith journey towards the end there too, because like
For sure.
you're
Huge
in terms of,
conversion at that time.
yeah, the way that you fulfill your roles. Where did that fit in with the journey? Like, were you not really practicing your faith in your 20s, and then that
So
came later? Or?
I actually converted at 17. I was very, very on board. I was going to be a nun. Like I was on a journey to become a nun.
Oh, so you're one of those that's like, when I go in on something, I'm all in.
All in. That's exactly right. So that's exactly right.
That's awesome.
So just over time, so I had my children, we were praying every morning, and after becoming a nurse and working full time, we sort of got away from that. You know, we weren't really praying at home together at all. You know, everybody was, it was as a priest monk that I know, he was like, it's like two ships that are just kind of passing each other once in a while in our faith journey. So it's like we weren't praying together. We were both kind of praying, but it wasn't like we weren't like a cohesive spiritual family like we are now. And it gave me the time to do that because the same priest monk, Father Theodosi, he was actually, the words out of his mouth what made me discern that I wasn't to be a nun, because I was actually going to go to Ukraine. I was 20 years old.
Yes.
I was going to move to Ukraine because I wasn't pleased with the monasteries here, although there was one in Ohio that at the time, if I would have known about it, I probably would have at least visited. It was Eastern Catholic, but at the time I had visited probably 12 Roman Catholic convents, you know, of varying sizes and spiritualities. And, but where was I going?
Well, just how it connected to your conversions journey.
So
you converted.
So I converted, and then we were doing prayers, and then I got into nursing. I started focusing on being a nurse and how I could be a better nurse, and not really focusing on the family, because in my mind it was like, well, that's just natural, you know, I know how to take care of kids. So I didn't really focus on that as much, and that's a huge regret. And now I'm all in. We're homeschooling. But yeah, post-COVID, around that time, before I became full-time, we were sort of on this brink of conversion. And then, you know, we both kind of converted back. We were sort of lukewarm, and we just converted back. And like now we're praying together. You know, I'm praying with the kids every morning with homeschool. We're praying as a family. And it's just like everything has just fallen into place. And it just was a huge like revival in our lives.
Yes. Back to intentionality.
Back to intentionality. Yeah.
Yeah. If you really think about it, like you have to put in the effort. It's basically like crafting the culture for the domestic church.
Yes. Yes. And he said, this priest, that's what I was going with that. So he said that every home is to be a monastery. It's a refuge from the world, and you should set it up that way. And that's what I feel like we finally did. This was the words that made me realize I wasn't supposed to be a nun. I was supposed to have an at-home monastery. And then I went and was a nurse. And my focus was like, how do I become the best nurse? And in hindsight, God allowed it, because now as my children are growing, I have all this, you know, TCT background and all this practice with TCT. And I now use it with my children, and it's very helpful. So all this is helpful. Hopefully the addictions expertise doesn't come into play with my family, but you never know. So same with the psychiatric, you never know what's going to come up. But just that, you know, we're coming up to having a teenager soon, and, you know, I think that's really going to make a big difference.
Absolutely.
So it all worked out in the end. It's not the way, if I could go back in time, it wouldn't be the way it is. But because of the way it is, I'm very thankful that I had that expertise to use otherwise in the family.
Right. Right. So I have a thought on, like, family life and just affirming this more traditional model. I think that it's absolutely necessary
Hmm.
to have a healthy culture, not only just within the household, but for all of society.
Right.
If more families did this, if they were more receptive to the reality that, look, there's just certain ways that are superior in terms of, like, your quality of life, your
Yes.
happiness,
Yes.
right? You talk about beatitude, like your happiness levels,
The
and then
outcome with your children, like
yeah,
it's been proven to be the best outcome.
right,
They
and
taught us that in Psychology 101. To
really,
be religious, to be a religious family, a cohesive religious family has the best outcome. To be a religious person, they didn't specify, obviously.
sure, like
To
which
be
faith?
religious, and to have that sort of foundation is has the greatest outcome of recovering from from recovering from trauma, from all this. But in practice, it's highly discouraged. And it's like, that makes no sense. You taught me this in college. And
And now we're all
now,
going to be experts
but
out in
now
the
the
field, and
culture,
meanwhile, no one's making
but
families.
now the culture is saying, yeah, but not religion, science. And it's like, but the studies have proven that that is not
Uh,
what heals people.
well, this is what I was going to touch on. I'm reminded how when I was on my, like, maybe traditionalist
Hmm.
faith journey, and I say it in that
Right,
way
right,
because I think that that can become its own heresy or its own idol
right.
if you're not careful.
Oh,
Like,
for sure. Yeah.
virtue lies in the mean. But, like, when I was on that bent, I was at a church where the homilies were like, you're going to hell if women wear pants, like,
Oh,
if you,
wow.
oh yeah,
Oh,
like,
okay.
go have a bonfire and get rid of them, like,
Oh,
yeah.
my
Oh,
gosh.
it was extreme.
Wow.
And,
Okay.
like, and and the bishop knew all about it, and he absolutely condemned it, but
Right.
just tolerates it because the money comes in. So,
Got.
if I mean, that's just how it goes in all these areas. You'll have these extremely far left parishes, you'll have these
Hmm.
extremely far right
Right.
parishes. And I was told this by the leadership. They're like, look, we know about it, we know they exist, but we want them to be here because otherwise they're somewhere else.
Right.
So,
Right.
and you know what, and I think that there's a wisdom to that. I'm not betraying anybody by revealing that truth,
Right.
because that's actually an insight into how faith leaders think,
Right. Right.
because they're like, what else are we supposed to do? These people are going to be how they are. Now, mind you, I would argue, well, that's why you have preaching from the pulpit
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
supposed to, like, call this stuff out. But everybody's got, they can only do what they can do. You can only give what you have.
Yeah. And
But
as a parent to children, if you have one child that's doing something and the other children are like, yeah, but why are you allowing him? It's like, well, it's wrong, but we're just going to let them. That's also a mixed signal,
you know
you
what? I
know?
think that's a good point. I
Yeah.
think that's a good point. But
Depends on how far they stray, though, I guess.
well, yeah, you know what? That could be its own episode.
It could.
And, like, well, and to take
Yeah.
it away from what some might perceive as church politics, because I'm not trying to be controversial here,
No, no.
but, like, to speak just squarely in our competency as family people, like, within family dynamics, like, when somebody in the family does something really, really evil, and it affects, let's say, the wider family, not just one specific immediate family
Hmm.
member, uh, and then the other family members have a choice to make. It's like,
Hmm.
well, we're either going to band together around, hopefully, the truth, whatever the objective truth is, because there's always going to be, three sides to every story: yours,
Right.
mine, and the truth,
Right. Right.
God's.
That's true.
And you know what I mean? But you have to be able to start there. If people are moral relativists, forget about it. There's nothing to work with.
Right.
But as long as people recognize that there's an objective truth, then everybody has to wrestle with a choice. Because if you choose to just relegate something to, oh, that doesn't affect us, therefore we're just going to leave that between you,
Hmm.
then it's like, like, what did our Lord say about the lukewarm?
Right.
So yeah, I guess.
Well, that makes sense, because if you're lukewarm when you're away from him. You're going to be lukewarm when you're for him as well. So being all in, I think, is a better way to go. It shows if you're all in on the wrong side, for example, St. Augustine, and then you have a conversion, you're going to be all in for God. That's what I think he means by it. I don't know. That's
an interesting point.
If you're lukewarm, if you're going to go become an atheist, but you're very lukewarm about it, and then you convert, it's very likely you'll have the same kind of position towards religion, towards your new religion, because that's just where your mindset is. I don't know. That's just
fascinating.
a thought.
No, I appreciate you sharing that.
But,
well, anyway, what do you think of this one?
okay.
So this was where I was going with the traditionalist thinking.
Right.
Like what I learned was, you'll get, because I was like, okay, where is the virtue lie in like the clothing that we wear? Well, what I learned is that it's that if you're wearing something that's form fitting, that's a problem.
Right.
Because form fitting means that there's nothing left to the imagination.
Right.
And it's a violation of decorum, modesty, discretion, decency. So okay, I had to figure that out, and I had to figure that out myself because there was all these weird mixed messages from the pulpit.
Right.
But so I figured that out, but then I'm learning from other traditionalist believers, and they were they reminded me of your story because they were mentioning Saint Gianna Brettamola,
okay.
who's in the medical field, and they were basically saying look, we don't revere her as a saint because she was a doctor. We
Right.
revere her as a saint in spite of that, actually.
Right.
Because towards the end of her life, she regretted being away from her family. And she actually was on the verge of completely leaving that career.
Right.
And that was actually what she was shooting for as a woman of Christ. And the reason they said that's a significant point is because otherwise people point to people like her for the opposite reason.
Right, for sure.
And
because of what a great doctor she was, a
right.
great physician.
Which is a violation of an understanding of the feminine genius writ large,
Right.
because it's never about what you do.
Right.
It's about who you are.
Right.
That makes you dignified in the eyes of God the Father as a daughter of his.
Yeah.
Right. And that's true for sons as well, but especially for the female comportment.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were making the case okay, so when you look at Saint Gianna in that way, the reason we know that it was not actually probably laudable in the eyes of God that she had that profession is because look at all of these papal writings.
Right.
There are these writings from the popes, especially the late 1800s with the social justice popes. I'm thinking of Casti Connubii in particular. It makes clear in no uncertain terms that the role of the mother in the house for a child if you have any children before they've reached the age of majority, there's no better place for you to be.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where I was thinking when you were sharing your testimony. I just wanted to affirm you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And for the humility that takes, because you've literally walked the walk yourself.
Right. Yeah.
You've been there, you've done that. And you're like, no, this is when harmony and order came into my home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So just, I guess, what are your thoughts on that? How do we, instead of being condemnatory, because that doesn't get anyone anywhere.
Yeah.
How do we be encourage, no, this is what gives life?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is I've seen on social media, it's a really interesting thing that I think it's more of a Gen Z, maybe millennial also. They're sort of waking up out of this feminist coma, and they're like, I am paying another person to watch my child. I'm going to work, leaving my child, to make money, to pay somebody to watch my child. And they in turn are making money watching my child so that somebody else can watch theirs. And it's just this very strange snowball effect of, is anybody really making money, and who is raising the children?
Whoa, that's deep.
And that was after the fact, and I'm like, wow, I got out of that.
Yes.
I got out of that.
Yes.
I work maybe once a week. Once a week is good to get out of the house sometimes and do some patient care. I love the patient care, but it's just not something I want to do full time right now. For sure.
Right.
You know, but once every week or so that's good. That's good. It
Yes.
gets me kind of out. I'm around adults.
Well, and
at church I'm around adults, you and your
no
wife,
question.
and, you know, all
Well,
the
and
good people.
let's be clear, like, you know, the mother fulfilling her role as rearing children, which is the lot of Eve, whereas it's the lot of Adam to go work by the sweat of his brow, right? Like that's another thing for me. I'm like, why are we giving our women both penances?
Well, that's true.
That's mean.
Women are taking it on willingly.
Well, brainwashing
like,
is a powerful
take
thing.
my child so I can go enjoy my second curse.
Well, it's weird. It's just it's sad. But like what you just described is actually what, like, I won't name the alphabet agency, but there was an agency in the 60s that was literally their game plan. Like the documents. Oh yeah.
Okay.
The documents have been released on that. They said it was post World War II thinking. They were like, we need to get women
I know what
to
you're talking
stay
about.
in the workplace because it serves two purposes. One, we can start taxing the other half of the populace. That never used to be a thing.
Right.
Only men were taxed.
Right.
And then we get to raise the children in the socialized education systems.
Exactly. From 6 weeks on. When I worked in daycare first, that was my first, well, not my very first job, but that was my first job after school. I also worked in a grocery store at 14, but I don't really count that.
Wow.
for a little bit.
Yes.
And, about 6 to 8 months, I think I worked. And, but that wasn't in this state. I think you have to be 16 in this state, but,
sure.
In the rural states, you can be 14.
Yes, it was legal.
It was very, very specific what times you could work, how many hours, and exactly what jobs you could do. I couldn't work the register. I could only like sack groceries and face the cans front. It was the worst jobs you could possibly have.
Just because of your age or because
of my age? At 16, you can work the cash register, and I forget what other things you can do, but it was just like you couldn't work past this time, so we had to clock out, and they were very strict. You clock out 15 to 20 minutes before this time, and like they're very strict. But anyway, so my first like real job where I felt like an adult at a job, not just a kid being told what to do by adults. And then here's your money.
Hey, at least you got the money, right?
I got the money though. And so, but in daycare, it starts at 6 weeks old. We're starting these children, and it's like it was a very sad. And I never saw any outright abuse. I never saw any outright neglect. They were all taken care of, but I just walked away from that saying, I will never have my children in daycare, which is why my husband was staying at home for the most part, and I was going to work. And at least they weren't in daycare, you know, as well.
Oh, that's still better.
You know, and I still am glad that I didn't go that route, but it was like I had justified it in my mind because it's like they're at home with their father. Like, that's okay.
Nothing beats the own family.
Right. But as time went on, I'm like, that's not good enough. You know, they need their mother. They need their mother at home. And, you know, it's just put everything in order. It's just beautiful.
Well, like I said, if I say it, I'm instantly a bigot. So I'm glad that
that's right.
I'm glad that you're
a racist and
it's just a chauvinist pig. Right. I hate to just be honest with them. I made you come here to say this. You know what I mean? Because that's just what I do. So no, it's look, men and women both need to be honest about this stuff.
Right.
Like, look, let's just say, like, maybe what's been going on for the last how many decades or longer in society is not necessarily the best way to go about it. Yeah.
Can we just call it a failed experiment in the West? I mean, I would say feminism won't work anywhere, but.
Well, it started with Lenin.
Definitely.
Vladimir
Lenin.
That's
true. It started in the East, 1917, probably around there.
Well, 1917 was when Our Lady of Fatima warned about it.
Right.
When she said that the errors of Russia will spread throughout the entire planet, theologians generally agree that was referring to communism.
Right.
But one of the facets of the communist program was feminism. Which Vladimir Lenin started.
Right.
So in a certain sense, part of what's spreading everywhere in terms of the error is that feminist component.
It is.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. And
Women, I feel like, are waking up. They really, I don't see it so much in the workplace, but on social media, like the multitudes of millennials that are going to like homeschooling and homesteading, and just like it's gone so extreme that people are just like, I'm going off grid, you know? And it's just like, and it's good because it's like people realize like we are miserable in this. We are just like rats in a cage. Like there's even songs about it. I remember growing up with Smashing Pumpkins, and there's a rat in a cage, and it's like, and it was true. You start with the school system. I keep bumping this.
That's okay.
And one thing I also realized after we pulled our children out of the school is the parallel between the prison system and the school system. And it's like they take the same bus, they have the same school tray, line up, be quiet, do what you're told, ask to go to the bathroom, ask to do this, like sit in your chair, stop moving, sit there for 6 hours, you do what we say. And obviously many of the teachers are very kind.
And it's not very wired for boys.
No, not
Not
at
like
all.
It is not as much as it is for girls.
Right. Girls can at least sit and do a craft, but it's also not great for girls because it's like they're good at doing crafts and creativity. They can sit still for that long. But when you're sitting there just having facts thrown at you for 6 hours, I wouldn't say that's even, I went crazy when I was little.
No,
I went crazy.
They labeled me.
I would look out the window. I was so like getting so depressed. I just wanted to be outside. It's, you know, the whole day. Get what, your 1 hour of recess, you get your 1 hour of outdoors time. I was
I would have in a nomadic tribe back in the day, I would have been one of the star hunters. I would have been one of the reasons that the tribe would be alive. Because I have a lot of energy.
Right.
And I have the ability to go get the animal.
Yeah.
In school, they labeled me with the ADD.
Right.
And they pumped me up in psychotropic drugs from 7 years old.
Yeah.
And the second that I made a conscious decision as an adult that I don't want to be addicted to these mind-altering substances.
You don't like meth?
Yeah, I'm not.
You got something against meth?
I'm real.
Methamphetamine?
I've been on it for a very, 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 very long time.
Wild.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it. Not gonna lie, at a certain point, right? You got to find the meth that works for you.
That's right.
You know, Adderall was legit. Concerta and all this other stuff, it wasn't doing it for me. But like, so I actually got off of it. I was at a gig, a tech gig, where they have metrics up the yin yang. Like they just like you couldn't even go to the bathroom without pushing a button.
Right.
Like it was nuts. It was its own form of oppression, in my humble opinion. But like, great metrics, great stats. And from the moment I got off of those medicines, my stats improved like crazy.
Wow.
And I started getting all of these awards. And they were like, you're like our star employee. What did you do? And I'm like, well, I guess I don't have ADD. Because if I had ADD, how in the world would I have been so focused on all of this stuff?
Well, with ADHD too, you can like hyper focus too. And it's like that is what because you're scattered until there's something you hone in on, and it really, you hyper focus, but then that makes you able, that's like a superpower. You're able to do that better than anybody else because everything in you is focused on that. I know that from my son and my husband, and they're not, my son's not diagnosed because I really just didn't want people pushing drugs on him. And the teachers, for the most part, you know, when they were in public school, were like understanding. The one, not so much. She really was like, yeah, you should really get him diagnosed. And I'm like, why are you really pushing for this? You want him to sit still in your class with some assistance. And so, you know, I never did. And that was, and I don't have those problems at home. Like he does have the focus issue, but with the one-on-one, you know, I know how to keep him engaged. And if I see him straying, okay, we'll go run around for a little while. Go take 15 minutes outside and run.
Eat some tuna.
Eat some tuna.
Yes.
That's
no.
a good idea.
There's certain meals that are very good for people that have, you know, that might have a certain inclination in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and there's like holistic remedies. And like I said, if you have an educational
what we're just getting into,
environment where like they can run around, if they actually have somewhere to go run around, burn off the energy.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
You may come to find, like, I just don't know that that's always the diagnosis. For me, like I
Mhm.
got reevaluated and they were like, you have no like issues.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, you know
You
what I
just didn't
mean?
want to sit still and for 6 hours for some reason
I don't
as a
know.
7-year-old.
Oh well, yeah, it's 7. I think that's just too young
So young.
to know one way or the other about, and it was the teachers at school pushing it.
Yes.
I was actually very always gifted, and so I was extremely bored.
Yeah.
Like I was
Yeah.
always like, I know the answer. Okay, like can we get to the next one? And when you're bored, you start getting mischievous. When you
Yes.
start getting mischievous, they want you to be shut down by a drug.
Yes. That's exactly right.
So it was pretty wild stuff. But anyways,
Wow.
I'm surprised we actually broached that. I wasn't that's a level of opening up that,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
that takes vulnerability. So, but thank you for sharing. And now I want to shift gears for a second and
Sure.
ask, because we ended up, you shared your career and you kind of shared a bit of like the faith conversion, and then like the conclusion or the resolution that you came to was like, and I am very thankful that I dialed that back because I
Right.
want to fulfill my role as a mother. That being said, I mean, like you said, God allowed that journey for a reason. You gained a lot of real world experience
Hmm.
and knowledge. And as you had mentioned, there was like this world before COVID and world after COVID. And you touched on it very briefly. You said, I'm beginning to see behavior on social media that, like,
Oh,
ipso
yeah.
facto, according to my clinical training, belongs in a facility.
Yeah.
And you know, when I heard you say that, it reminded me of like I have, you know, um one of my upper concentration courses in order to get my credentials was ethics. And in ethics, within computer systems was a topic that was brought up. And they said, like, by definition, Facebook is a virus. They were like, this is a virus
Really?
because
Okay.
it has been proven that when you get it on your computer, it tracks you and it tracks what you're
Oh,
doing,
that
even
makes
if you're
sense.
not on it,
Right.
which is what a virus does.
Is
That's what
that
a
true for
virus
all
is.
social media, or do you think just
Oh, I mean, I'm not up to speed on the latest stuff. I
right?
actually don't really do social
I feel
media.
like if that's true for Facebook, that's probably true for all of them.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a presence for the sake of our life coaching, but it's almost like it reminds me of, like, I remember seeing like a Tucker Carlson clip one time where he was like, I don't watch television at all. And it's like, dude, you're like, that's your thing. Like, but it's
Right.
like I just don't do that stuff.
Right.
Like, as somebody who understands the ethics of technology, I
Hmm.
have like a specific hygiene.
Hmm.
But that's kind of my point. My point is like, I got trained and I got the credentials and the certification to be the literal expert. Everyone's an expert now, but
That's
but
right.
but truly, like,
Right.
the one who's qualified to tell people, like, get off of that. It's actually horrible for you because it's
Oh, so you
dishonest.
do that with your clients,
Well, I mean, if adults do whatever they want,
right?
you know, I mean, for children,
Oh,
that's a
I
different
bet.
conversation.
Right.
For
Right.
children, I think no, they should not be on it
Not on social
because it's
media.
clinically been proven that it's very bad for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I was getting at is I'm making a parallel
Okay.
to people being, you know, whether or not they should be in the clinic. You're an expert at that and you're able to look at it and say that's how this should be, and then people may not listen, and that's got to be frustrating. That's how it is for me. I'm like, hey, people, like, maybe you should not utilize these systems that literally are stealing from you, and they're not necessarily even telling you about it because that's dishonest.
Right.
And you tell someone that and they look at you like you have three heads.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, okay, all right, so you've got an opinion just like everybody else about social media. Nice to know you. I'm going to go keep doing what I like to do.
Yeah. You're an extremist, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
do my thing.
And
This is normal.
it's like, no, like, I had to get in order to get my degree, I had to like pass tests to like make sure that I understood that this is the truth.
Right.
Like, so that's my point. Like, I could imagine in your field seeing something similar and being like, man, like, if society is just accepting this as normal now when I know that it's not, like, that's got to be
Mhm.
a little infuriating.
Well, what's interesting too is like even that behavior, when I started nursing, that behavior is not even acceptable in the psychiatric ward. And it's
Wow.
prevalent on the street. Because if that person ends up in the psychiatric ward and they're acting like that, they are not going to be conscious. Well, not unconscious, but they're going to be medicated and possibly 5-point restrained.
Wow.
Because that's not even really normal behavior for a psychiatric facility.
What?
Pre-COVID.
Let's define the behavior here. Like, what kind of behavior were you seeing on these videos that you're like, that doesn't belong on the street, that doesn't even belong in a psych ward?
So just the random acts of violence that seem completely unprovoked. I've seen this a lot. Like, I don't really follow any of that stuff anymore.
Oh, like the sucker punches.
Yeah, they'll just go up and punch a kid, or they'll just start fighting and screaming obscenities that make no sense just for the sake of screaming. Like just wild behavior, like acting almost animalistic, and just wild and physically out of control. That I know, looking at that person, I know exactly who would be on the team that would be able to actually restrain that person.
Right.
And if those particular people were not on shift that day, that would have been a very difficult shift.
Right.
So even in the facility, that's not even like normal behavior. Before I was a nurse, I would have thought that that's what the psychiatric ward was like. And you do have patients come in and they sort of play the role, and they start acting up, and then it's like they realize, okay, that's not how this goes. This is a therapeutic environment. People come here to get better, not come here to act wild, but some people, it's almost like fun for them to come and act wild, and that's sort of part of their mental disability, obviously, their mental illness. And but they learned quickly back when it was fully under control, and it most of the nurses were able to stop behaviors before they got out of control. Hey, come over here, let's go into this quiet room, let's talk about what's going on, distracting, depending on the patient and what their illness is. There was tactics for every little thing. And the older nurses were like, it was just like second nature to them, and they were such an asset before it was sort of a mass retirement at our facility.
Oh, wow.
But pre-COVID and post-COVID, I would say the medication issue is like, it's really being pushed. Like medication is the answer to everything now. And it was not like that before. TCT, even in addictions, it was going to group, talk to your counselor, talk to the nurse. Let's take you outside. I took a girl outside for a walk by herself, just me and her. And she just talked to me for about 40 minutes. And then she, her anxiety went down, and she's like, okay, I think I'm okay. And we went back to the unit and we resumed our day.
Wow.
That's not really encouraged anymore. It's like, okay, go to the nurse and get a pill. Go to the nurse, everything is go to the nurse, take some meds, and do that. Like, that's
Do you
the
think it's
answer
because
to
even
everything.
the healers, so to speak, are tapped out? Is it because they've
That's
hit
a good question.
Like, have they just like, is their threshold for tolerance gone down because they went through COVID too?
I don't think COVID itself is the reason. I don't know why that's the point at which it sort of changed, but I think because it was more like lockdown, and you couldn't really have the freedom to go out and do what you needed to do with the patients, and they just never left that mindset. Pre-COVID, it was very common, not in psych, obviously, but in addictions, they would go out to movies, they would go out to groups, they would come home come back smelling like a bonfire, because they would go to this, AA meeting around a bonfire. And it's like, that's very rare now. And the newer clientele don't know the pre-COVID, and there's a lot of turnover in psych because of the burnout rate. Right. And with the counselors especially, not really with the nurses, but the counselors take the brunt of a lot of things too. So that's also a big difference between psych and addictions. We sort of split the role with the counselors. But I don't think it's a burnout thing. I think it's just, they came into it post-COVID. We didn't leave the unit. And so they don't know that that's how it was. So they're not encouraging the patients to go out as much. They're not. And some of the older nurses are like, hey, you can take them out. Like, I'll go with you. Like, we can go outside. And I think they're like nervous because they've never done it. And it's like, how am I going to take 15 patients outside in the parking lot. Like, what if something happens, you know, and they haven't been equipped for it. Whereas the older counselors, it's like the new counselor would come and the older ones would teach. But since we got a lot of new people, nursing wise too, because sometimes the nurses go out too. And it's like, it's probably good to have a nurse out there in case something happens. But I don't know, it just never went back. So now they're more cooped up, you know? So that's going to increase your anxiety. That's going to increase your depression. That's, you know, on the men's floor, that's going to increase the aggression.
And then you just throw another pill at it.
So it's
And
just
it's
like an
you're
easy
throwing
fix.
Band-Aids
It's
on
like,
top
okay,
of
go to the nurse,
Band-Aids.
get a pill, and they'll come. And now they just like expect medications like around the clock. And it's like, well, these are addictions patients. Like, we're trying to do the opposite with them. Like, how about we don't take something for, you know, when you're feeling like this,
right,
you know, every single time. Let's try some coping skills first. And if it gets to a point you can't, you know, you need to take medicine, well, okay, take some medicine. But it's like, you know, medication has become like the poster child for health and salvation, you know, in the medical field. And it's like, it's really not. It's good in certain circumstances, but that shouldn't be like the first thing you go to. Like, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious today. You know, maybe I had a little too much coffee. All right, can I get my pill? You know, it's like, that's not really what it's for. You know, it's for when you really are having trouble and you've done your coping skills and they're not helping. And it's like, they're just not being taught to encourage that anymore. It's just like, okay, go to the nurse, because I don't know. I don't know exactly what caused it, but there was a huge shift that way after COVID. And with the overdose rate going up, suicide rates going up after COVID also, I think they're also like scared. Like, you don't want to make a wrong move. Let's just let the nurse handle it, you know, like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's a tricky situation right now. And I hope it gets better, but
Yeah, obviously I'm a solution focused person, so I hear that and I'm like, what's the resolution? Like, you have to know, how do we get here? And you know, and people need to be honest with themselves about, like, does this serve us? Is
right.
this working? And if it's not, what do we replace it with?
Yeah.
And it's like, if it's true, like what you're saying, because I'm also trying to determine like how much of what you've experienced is adaptable or is scalable to what's going on in the industry writ
Right.
large.
Right.
Because if people reverted to a specific way of doing things during lockdowns, and now they're just stuck in that way of doing it.
That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, that if that's the case, like,
We just
it's
gotta
like, is that
break
its
the
own mini
ice.
trauma? Is it like its own
It
mini,
could be
like a mass, like trauma on a mass scale where
like
it's
they're afraid
like,
to go out because something will happen. You know, like, we're gonna stay safe inside. You know, I think it's sort of a
yeah,
mentality because the counselors are getting younger, the nurses are getting younger, and they're pretty soon we're not going to have any pre-COVID or post-COVID or pre-COVID counselors or nurses. You know, eventually it's going to get to that point where, just due to aging, you know, they're going to be 23 years old and born after COVID. You know, that's going to come too. And it's like, I just wonder what that's going to look like, you know?
one of my hats that I wear throughout my career from time to time is physical security.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point when I was the head security of school,
Okay.
and I was responsible for all the cameras.
Okay.
And if the administration needed to, like, know that something was going down with a physical threat, they had to come through me in order to assess the situation. So I was the detective, I was the investigator, it was nuts. And but it was depressing because post COVID, they said that because it was only for a season, so I didn't have like the pre snapshot, but
Right.
from what I was told, like, it wasn't even in the same ballpark in terms of how much more violence
Right.
was going on after they came back into the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally like on a daily basis. And there was like always a concern that
That's
someone had
exactly
like a
what I
knife
experienced.
in
Yep.
their hands.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, and these are like kids.
Right.
And like in some cases barely pubescent. And like, and
Oh,
you're just
wow.
like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? So I know just from that, like, that it was a huge change in terms of like people's psychology. They were cooped up at home for too long.
Right.
Like they were like physically vandalizing the place, like ripping things off of the
Oh my
walls.
gosh.
They
Yeah.
were like, they never used to do this before COVID.
Right. Yeah, that was a strange turning point.
Yeah. So there's definitely like, I don't even think we fully understand
Right.
the true repercussions yet of like the after effects. But I just know that empathy is important.
Right.
Compassion is important. Being honest about what does and does not serve the community is important. I know the role that you've played is extremely important, right? Like getting people not addicted, getting people that have mental health issues the help that they need. You know, the Catholic teaching on mental health is also fundamentally different than modern
Oh
psychology.
yeah. Yeah.
That could be its own episode.
That's right.
Like, no, because like that's my, you know, as a deliverance minister,
That would be
that's
a good episode.
that we should. If you would like to come back and we want to entertain that, maybe we will. But because the Catholic understanding of mental health, like I've read books and books and books on this because I wanted to crack the code. I know that what these modernists are teaching is not going to help people at the end of the day,
Right.
not in its totality. Like they don't have the full picture.
Right.
So I'll give you just one perfect example. Clinical narcissistic personality disorder, NPD.
Okay.
The statistics on that disorder are that 5 to 8% of people have it, which
oh
is,
wow.
oh yeah,
I didn't realize that.
clinical. And so let's take that on the low end. On the low end, that means 1 in 20 people
Yeah.
that you are walking around and interacting with on a day-to-day basis are so narcissistic that it's clinical, which means, and I'm not talking about people bandy that word about like way too
Right,
willy-nilly.
right.
I'm talking about clinical, meaning
The
like
true definition.
they are not able to see anything except through the lens of self.
Right.
Like that is their affliction, that is their illness. Secular modernist psychology states that there is no known cure for this. It's actually one of the saddest things you can have because
all personality disorders, there's no, in fact, you can't even oftentimes somebody with like borderline personality, antisocial personality, a psychiatrist explained they will also be diagnosed with a mood disorder, whatever one that is closest to what they are experiencing, because insurance will not cover treatment for a personality disorder because they are not treatable.
right.
So that's
that, and that you just touched on the money, literally. Of no, right? Of like, because everyone wants to line their pockets, and it's
Yeah.
all just a risk calculation to them. And they're like, oop, too much risk. They're not worthy of life insurance.
right.
They will never get it. And that's not the Catholic understanding of mental health. We teach that one little itty bitty iota of grace has the capacity to cure all illness,
Right.
any illness.
Right.
And modernist psychology doesn't respect that that is true. And therefore, modern psychology is not worthy of respect in its totality.
Right.
And that's
not
whatever.
As the whole picture for sure.
Not in its
Especially
totality.
Whole, but right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's things to learn. The empirical sciences get us certainly some places.
Right.
But like, and this is also why I think Father Ripperger, this is what he meant when he said that, you know, I'm realizing I'm saying this to somebody who actually went in this field now. I'm not talking about you.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's like, psychologists are people that, well, you're not a psychologist, you're a nurse.
No.
But he's like, psychologists are people that could never make it as a philosopher.
Okay.
And I know what he meant when he said that. What he meant was psychology is just subalternated into philosophy. Philosophy does all of psychology plus plus.
Right. That's a good point. Okay.
And so like some people don't even like respect like where competency is in terms of like for example, like what I just said could be perceived as controversial.
Right.
So people are just going to look for a reason to pick me apart and then shut the conversation down.
Yes.
Whatever. Fine. Kill the messenger. But the message stands because like modern psychology is lacking. So if we want to
But they
bring,
teach that religion is a potential answer, but in practice, they teach the opposite.
well,
Which I
fallacious
found
reasoning.
I was really stunned by that, because when I learned that, that was one of the first classes I ever took. I was like, okay, yeah.
Right.
And boy,
Because we always
I was
need
in for a
modern,
rude awakening after that one class. That's not exactly how it operates.
yeah,
I got my
theory
hopes
and
up.
then pragmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, the practical. Well, it's we as modern men, we need like all of these scientific studies to prove common sense.
Right. Yeah. Now, do I have it right? The Catholic Church started the hospital system. Is
Oh
that
yeah.
true?
Yep.
Because that's what I heard, and I wasn't sure if that was 100% accurate or not, or if they just.
I think I mean we are credited for, the some modern medical advances.
Mhm.
I know that there was like a Franciscan who was huge in
Padre Pio.
advancing the medical field. Well, that was evangelistic vigor and doing an act of charity, opening that hospital. But there were religious who like figured out major medical breakthroughs.
Because how does it go from being, well, I know exactly how it goes from being something that the church sort of instituted, or at least, had a huge hand in to being
Developing, yeah.
completely run by the spirit of greed. It's like, how do we get back to it being a healing institution?
I think it's
a charitable institution where, the nuns were taking care of the sick, and, everything was, it wasn't about money. It was about healing the sick. It was about, like what Mother Teresa was doing in India. How did we go from that to where we are now? And it's like, pushing these opiates on these poor drug addicted people. And it's like, it's a requirement now. A counselor told me, so this is outside of I give the medications, but I'm not in charge of, whether or not they go on it. But a counselor, brought me this concern, and he said, now after COVID, we can't, it is actually like, I don't remember, you can get in big trouble. I don't remember exactly what happens, but if you do not offer, it's called MAT, and it's medication assisted treatment, I believe that's what it stands for. And you're giving opiates to opiate addicts so that they can function in the world. And it's helpful for some people, but you have to offer it to every single one of them and encourage everybody on, and try to get everybody on this. And
okay, who's getting the subsidiary kickback?
That's corrupt. And the counselor that I talked to about this, he's a former addict. Most of the counselors are, which is how they got in their profession. And he was like, I remember being like trying to tell my counselor, like, I really want to get on Suboxone, I really need it. And the counselor was like, I don't think that's for you. And this was, 15 years ago. I think it was 10, 15 years ago. I think
now they're encouraging it.
And now she would actually get probably fired for that, for discouraging it. And he said, years later, he found her and hugged her and said, thank you for not letting me go on this medication. Like some people really do need it. Some people really actually, they can't function without it. And okay, but why are we sort of almost not encouraging, but it's like they're trying to talk them into it, even if they're against it. And that's what they're required to do now. And that's not right. That is not right, because their best case scenario is to be off opiates. But it's a post-COVID world.
And I apologize for almost interrupting you at the beginning there in my zeal. It's because you asked, how do we get away from this? I'm not going to name the name because, again, I'm really not trying to cause controversy. This is just a cultural observation talk about what's going on in society today. But there was a case that just happened this past week.
Okay.
Maybe you heard about it, and maybe you'll entertain me about not naming names here, but like it was one of the major entities of our church saying, we're suing because we expect federal money to do our charitable works.
Yeah.
And that right
Yes.
there is the exact reason. That was probably one of the main moments when we lost our mission. We lost our way. This notion of entitlement
Mm-hmm.
of government monies to serve the needy. Like, I can't even fathom who thought that was a good idea.
Right.
Like, what? And you're supposed to speak for the church to some degree? Like, you think you represent the people? Because that is not how this works.
Yeah, it
When
was
you
never the
accept,
government's job. It was the church's job to do the
yes,
charity.
and when you accept that government money, that's exactly where all the corruption creeps
Now
in.
they tell you how to be charitable.
And what you're allowed to say
Yeah,
from the pulpit.
right. Right.
Don't ruffle the feathers, because now all of a sudden that spigot will get shut off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very
You
sad.
should never, ever betray the Church of Christ and put us in that kind of a position.
For money.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. And to your point about 15 years ago, this was the policy on Suboxone. Now they're pushing it like candy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, in general, and this is taught in philosophy too, not just like, this isn't a theological thing. Like, Plato was huge on this. Like, Plato was like, look, if you're going to fundamentally change like major rules or major laws in terms of like discipline, the way that something is implemented, you run a very serious danger every time you do that, because you should expect moral relativism from your
Right.
populace.
Yeah.
Because they're going to look at law and they're going to say, well, it's changeable. And it damages the integrity of the bedrock of immutable morality.
Right.
So, like,
True.
I realize that this is just very downstream from something that foundational in terms of that specific case example.
Mm-hmm.
But like, people should really take that into account
Yeah.
when they're making these policy changes.
Right.
Because you're doing more damage than you realize. It's not just the immediate effect, it's the reverberating effects.
Right. Right.
But
Well, the other issue too is, we were talking about holistic sort of medications and, trying those first. And I'm thinking about in like nutrition. And we were talking earlier about how they take this food and they take the vitamins out and they give it to you with sugar. And then they take the vitamins and put those in bottles and they sell it to you separate, and it's like, you kind of got to eat them together, but there's, so they get money for this and money for that. And I think that might be a big, if you could have a hospital where you had true food, it wasn't this, like we give our patients a lot of stomach issues. Constipation is a huge issue in hospitals because of the food. The food is, you're trying to feed a mass amount of people, and it's a lot of processed foods. And so now they have to go on medications for that they don't normally have to.
Oh my goodness.
And it's like, there's a place in Canada I had gone to when I was about 19, and it's called Madonna House. Not to be confused with the long-term addictions program here in the U.S., but it was Catherine. Her first name is Catherine. I can't remember. It might come to me. But she started Madonna House, and the men live separate from the women. The men do the men's work. The women, do the cooking. Everything's done from scratch. They do like their own gardening. They do their own cooking. They do everything from scratch. And I don't know exactly what their mission is. I don't remember, but I stayed there for a few days. I think I stayed there for a week. I was about 19 or 20. And it was just really good to see. And I'm like, what if we had a long-term program for addictions? What if we had a psychiatric population, the stable, the ones that are capable of living this way, just getting their hands in the dirt, getting outside, taking care of animals, gardening, and then cooking the food that you grew, and then, eating all the nutrients all in one meal. That was how God created it. And just how much better, like we've been eating like that at home, and how much physically better I feel. I ended up
Yes.
losing like 40 pounds.
God
And
bless you. That's awesome.
what a big difference in how I feel. Like it's been great. And I'm like, what if we did that for our patients? They're
Well, a lot of
mental,
them don't ever even get outside.
so they don't go
Or if they get
outside. They
outside,
don't eat healthy.
it's this like extremely small little patch of concrete with giant cages
Yeah, yeah.
all
So we
around
have
them.
at our hospital, we
That's
have
it.
a small, they have a, it's maybe the size of your house, a patch of grass, maybe double. It's where they throw the football around. They play flag football, but it's like a huge parking lot. It's in between two big parking lots, and it's like that's their outdoors time. It's like, I mean, it's better than being inside in a hallway, but it's like we're
Right.
trying to help these people mentally, and we have them caged in, eating food that's maybe good for them, maybe better than the homeless patients. Maybe they're eating better,
And you get a
but
concrete jungle at best when you're
and
outside.
yeah,
That's
it's
not
like,
nature.
what if we had something like that? I don't know how you would even start something like that, but where they're growing their own food, they're eating it, they're responsible for animals, they're responsible for plants, it would just be such a healthy mindset. I don't know how that would even be implemented, but
Yeah, I just
what a
feel I
difference.
feel like people hear something like that and they're like, "Nope, there's all these liability issues and therefore we're not even going to try."
Right.
And that's a serious issue in with American culture too, is just how litigious it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned, one of the bureaucratic issues at one of your gigs was all about a legal concern. And it's like
Right.
that tends to be the blockage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you get a blockage, it doesn't mean that you give up. I mean, that's taking the easy way. The question just becomes, how do you overcome that blockage? Like, what would that, like, I don't know, like getting people back to nature, at least for like a little bit or for like a bit of time. Like, what are they afraid? Is it that they're going to rip off the earth and just start throwing dirt at people? Like, how do you strike that balance instead of saying, okay, you have one bad apple, we're taking it away from the whole bunch?
I think in the grand scheme, it comes down to money. It comes down to that wouldn't make us as much money. When you have a psychiatric floor, it's a hospital. It's not a psychiatric hospital. It's a hospital. And 2 floors are dedicated to psychiatric.
Right.
So when you have a patient in the hospital, that's buco bucks from the insurance company, mostly Medicaid. And it's just a revolving paycheck. And it's like, well, as long as you keep these beds full, we're going to get our money and we'll give you your cut and we're all going to be happy except for the patients. The patients are the ones that are going to suffer. So if you had a setting like that, who would make money off of that? You'd have somebody buying the property, but where's the income? Like, I think that's probably the hiccup.
Hmm.
How do you charge insurance? I mean, you could somehow do it, I feel like, but I'm not sure exactly too much about the financial aspect, but I know it would be likely to be a lot less money than a hospital bed.
Well, we still have very humble beginnings at this channel. We haven't blown up or anything, but if anybody happens to be listening and you got an idea, please drop it in the comment.
Yeah.
We'll follow up. We'll follow through. Let's crack this egg.
That's right.
We don't have to just figure this out alone.
That's right.
Like, no, like I think you bring up a very good idea here. Like, how do we bring compassion and empathy to our psychiatric patients? Because these people do go through hell.
Yeah.
I think they're like the modern day lepers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they're the outcasts of society, this inconvenient truth off to the side that people would rather just pretend like it's not there. And it's like, no, these are children of God. These are human beings. These are
Right.
people with dignity, value, and worth, and that are going through really hard times. And let us never forget what our Lord said. What you did for the least of these, you did to me.
Right. And think about the addictions patients. Like, how many times have you seen on social media, when they talked about the Narcan? I don't know that I agree with having injection sites, but maybe Narcan on hand. I don't know. Is that going to encourage it? Is that going to save lives? How is that going to go? Well, I don't know. I can't tell you that part. But where was I going with that? I keep jumping the gun.
I don't know, but I think that anything that involves money should be questioned.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, why
Yeah.
this is involved in the overall processing of the way we do things. This is involved. We're gonna just mandatory push Suboxone now.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, I know where I was going with it. So we have all this Narcan, but then you have these comments, and it's like, just let them die. After 3 strikes and you're out. Why are we letting them
oh,
live? And so you have this population that hears from the majority of the people around them, on maybe not to their faces, but they're seeing like, I should be dead. Everybody thinks I should be dead. I'm completely worthless. Like, why am I even trying? The world wants me to just give up and die. Like, I'm not worth one more chance, you know? I mean, I have patients that have been Narcan 8, 9 times, you know. Sometimes
wow.
sometimes the nursing Narcan group turns into a competition of who's been Narcan the most, which is comical, but
I've reached cat status 9.
so that can be pretty humorous. But in hindsight, it's like, these people are being told that they're worthless, and they really shouldn't have even had those other chances. Like, they should have died, 5 Narcans ago.
This is the same reason children shouldn't be on social media.
Exactly.
Because they're
Exactly.
psychologically not even developed enough to know who they are and their identity yet.
Mhm.
And they're sitting here pimping themselves out, trying to like act like what they're supposed to be
Yeah.
based on what they think that other people want them to be.
Right. Right.
That's not normal for a child to be subjected to
Not
that.
even close. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then the bullying, there's bullying at school, but back in our day, we went home and we weren't bullied.
Yeah, you just shut it
Now
off
children go home and they're continually being bullied on
through
social
the
media
cyber.
now. So they have no refuge if they have their own phone and they're on social media. Like, are they going to have the ability to just put it down and be like, you know what? I'm not going to listen to that. No, they're going to scroll for more comments and be like, well, it's because it's addictive. And then they're addicted to these horribly negative things being told to them. I don't know anybody personally this has happened to. This is just what I've
No,
seen, scenarios
it's a
I've
thing
heard
that's out
about.
there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's something that you sidestep when you take the courageous step of homeschooling as well.
Right.
Only, reason number 862
Yes.
of why it's something that people should really consider. But
Right.
well, shoot, I'll tell you what, Kara, I really appreciate you sharing your heart with me.
Yeah.
And thank you for giving us kind of like some insight behind the curtain on what's going on. I mean, do you have any other thoughts, anything that comes to mind in terms of like how it was pre-COVID, what's going on post-COVID, and like what we can do about it?
Yeah, what we can do about it is the question. How do we get back? How do we train new nurses that don't have the pre-COVID nursing insight? Right now there's a lot at our facility. There just really isn't too much. There's maybe 2 nurses that are still there from when I started, of the older nurses.
So succession planning.
Succession planning is huge.
This
I
needs
would
to
say
exist.
that is number 1, because that mass exodus really, the hospital never recovered from that.
What was the reason for the exodus again? Forgive me if you said.
So there was a mass retirement, and then other nurses that were close to that age, not quite retirement, but within like 5-10 years, once they were like, well, I'm not staying here if these nurses are retiring, so they're like, this place is going to get so dangerous. So they just all left.
Wow.
So it turned into it just turned into a noob bill. No, we're just the blind leading the blind at that point.
Wow.
The most senior nurse, other than the 2 that one on each floor that had been there about 30 years, they're still there, but 4 years.
But you remember the wisdom from before. Are you empowered to be able to maybe train up some of the other noobs on the old ways?
I don't think so, because I think it's just, at least not at the facility I was at. I think it seems to be beyond repair right now. I don't know if it's beyond repair. If you get nurses from other psychiatric facilities that have that kind of a solid foundation, they've been psychiatric nurses for 30, 40 years, and they come on board and train the new ones. But I think succession is really the best the best, but I don't know how do you implement that in when all the nurses are just on survival mode from the time they punch in to the time they punch out. And it's like, I don't know, how do you go from a chaotic situation to just getting it back under control? Like, I don't have the experience. I've been a nurse almost 9 years,
What
and
was it about
compared to 30, I mean,
what was the experience that they had? Like, what were the specific traits that maybe some of the newer guard post-COVID don't have? Like, what are the traits of a good nurse that's resilient in
preventing behaviors.
preventing
Being able to
behaviors?
have the insight to know something is brewing before it brews. I would say that is number one.
It's like a sixth
And
sense
I'm
almost.
starting to get that a little bit, but I also left the full psychiatric field. But I was, even after 3 years, I was starting to get that. Like, okay, I can tell this person's looking a little agitated. They look like they're about to, they're sitting still, but there's a look to their face. I started seeing, like, okay, that person's agitated. Nobody else realizes it. Let's get them distracted before it's too late. Let's get them redirected before it's too late. And that, now it's survival mode. It's just, going from one crisis to another and putting out this fire, and then there's a fire here. And once one fire starts, they just get all riled up because they don't feel safe and secure, because it's a unit of chaos right now. And it's like, well, now they're feeling anxious, and now they're going to act out, and it just becomes a domino effect. And how do you get it back under control is I don't know how to do it without experienced nurses. Like, that's not something you can teach a young nurse. That's something they have to, through experience. But because the turnover rate is like 1 to 2 years, they're just not getting that. You have I was a graduate nurse when I started, and I learned from the best. I had that solid foundation, and then it just got ripped out from under us, and none of us had any solid foundation anymore. And we're like, wow. Well, what did she tell us? What are we supposed to, it's everybody's scrambling. And whereas before, there was like, they knew what to do. They worked as a team, and they just knew their role. Like one nurse, she would just be the medication nurse, because that's just what she could do. I think she had like a bad back or something, so she couldn't physically hold. So then, a couple of male nurses, they'd be the holders of, the arms. But like, everybody just knew what they were to do, and boom, they'd do it. It would be over in about a minute. Whereas now it's like, 30 to 60 minutes to try to get this person calmed down, because it's a scramble. And it's like, well, what do we do? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? People are hiding, and people are, afraid to get in there. And it just causes, and then the patient sees that you're scared, and then they either are scared themselves, or they're like, yeah.
Right. They're going to exacerbate further.
And it's just, yeah, I don't know. Experienced nurses are key, but I don't know how you just magically produce them.
No,
they would have to come from other facilities, but I don't know why they would do that.
Well, number one, it falls on the chain of command, whoever is responsible for building up the staff.
Well, that's just as much turnover as well. When I was there for 3 years, I think we went through like 5 directors, because it's difficult to manage. And now the turnover is just constant. I was there for 4 months, and I think we had 3 directors in that 4-month period.
Wow.
And just nobody wants the job, because it's gotten so chaotic. And unless they come from a place where they know how to run a floor, they're not going to be an asset. Most of them want to come into something that's already running, and they want to maybe make a few changes, tweaking to their liking, but they're walking into a dumpster fire, and they're like, yeah, I'm out. I can't do this. Like, I came from a place that was functional.
Right.
I can't make this functional. And it's like, well, you would need like a mass team to just come in and be like, okay, this is what we're doing. I don't know how you would implement that, though.
Well, thanks be to God that you had the realization that, your family life is what you're predominantly called to.
Number one.
Because it's a mission that there's always going to be a need for. It reminds me when our Lord said, you will always have the poor among you.
Mm-hmm.
right? For some reason, the UN didn't get that memo. Like these people just feel like they're gonna set these goals that go against what God told us is how it's
Right.
gonna be,
Right.
and good luck. But so then you have to say, well, does that mean God's unjust? No, it means that it's a test. There's always going to be an opportunity throughout every generation for us to meet the moment in
Mm-hmm.
relationship to that test. And so too with like what you're describing, right? Like there's going to be the need for some sort of a system to help people in society that are struggling through these
Mm-hmm.
afflictions. But we have to have a healthy understanding and awareness of what is our true mission here. Like addictions and mental health are two different animals, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking about people that should know better and need to be given the tools to take better responsibility of having self-control. And then you're talking about people that may or may not have the capacity to know better. And so there's different levels of empathy that are needed and different remedies and different kinds of conversations to be had there.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we need to also have an appreciation for a holistic, Catholic, informed understanding of mental health as such, right? Mental illness is a result of, falling away from the truth.
Right.
And so that's either that happens to somebody because it's their responsibility, which is another thing that modern psychology gets wrong sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
They don't remember, like, if in the chain of causation somebody did something to put themselves to that state, then they actually are responsible.
Right. Right.
So there's that. And so we need to truly discern, like, from God's perspective, what does this person need?
Right.
Because it's not for us to get in the way of penance.
Right.
But then also sometimes it's an affliction that was given to somebody that came from another.
Right.
And then that definitely requires much more empathy. But either way, mercy is required. And so, but if you don't even have a healthy understanding of how mental health works, forget about it. You're not qualified to a point to necessarily appreciate it in its totality.
Right.
And so we need that. And those missions, maybe this facility and that, and we don't want to get too drilled down into the particulars of any one place here. That's not our role. But
Right.
like,
Right.
but if any given one place just doesn't have it together, maybe they need their subsidies taken away and they just need to cut their losses. I don't condone it. I would
Right.
imagine that these things need to exist within multiple localities because mental health is an issue that transcends any given specific
All.
place.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like these people either need help from people that are way more experienced or you need to just like get the right amount of staff and trial by fire, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learn your sixth sense
Yes.
because it's survival to a certain extent.
Right.
And
Right.
learn how to read people and understand and figure out what's going on in the room. And, intuition is huge. And then de-escalate and be good working with a team. You need to work as a cohesive unit,
Right.
So, but it's, in your case, by God's grace, you have your main mission and
Yes.
you've come to discern and realize like, like my identity is not married to that place's issues,
Right. Exactly.
So thanks be to God for that. Um, and with that, I think we've had a good episode of it
It
here,
was.
huh?
It was a good talk.
Yeah. And we've also got some ideas for maybe some other things that we'll get into if you'd like to come back. And
Yeah. Sure.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right.
And
Thank
so
you.
I like to close just by asking, like, do you have any closing words of wisdom or anything that God has placed on your heart? We covered Eastern spirituality. Oh, by the way, give us a plug on your YouTube channel.
Oh yeah. So
I want
my
people to check that out. Make sure you
my
subscribe.
neonate channel, as I call it. It's a
Yes.
newborn. It
It
just
won't be
has.
forever.
I don't think did we discuss about my first what spawned my idea for the
You
first
mentioned that the
video?
one went viral, got you had like 30 something subscribers,
Yes.
and it's
So
because you wanted to do a more proper exegesis on the topic.
yes. So I had originally seen this video. I don't remember if I discussed this. So I had originally seen this video and it was biblical evidence I think I did actually.
You did.
Yeah, with the fake nails.
And you were like, the nails were not.
His Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
The codex.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's light from light.
What's to be expected down the road with it?
All right. So the theme is scriptural theology, and it's based on this accusation by non-Catholics that we are not scripturally sound, that they are the Bible teachers and we are the idolaters and we have nothing to do with the Bible. And it's to kind of prove that, everything that we do is not directly from Bible, but the scriptures definitely back up our beliefs, the pillars and foundations of our faith, Mary, the Eucharist, all the sacraments, the dogmas. And so the original plan was to go through each dogma, but that might actually come after the sacraments and Mary, just because those are the pillars. But for the sacraments, I go through the readings. Like for baptism, I went through the readings of theophany from the Eastern Catholic perspective. And I sort of put them together in a cohesive, like, why do we have baptism? Like, and about how it's the circumcision of the new covenant, and it's we're dying and resurrecting with Christ as we go into and come out of the waters, and just explaining, because even baptism and marriage, I've noticed a lot of Protestants don't even hold those two sacraments as necessary. It's like faith alone. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I'm trying to like debunk some of that, show that we're scriptural, try to draw some people into the faith, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. So you said it's light from light? Light from light. And it's the reason I chose that is that's a section in the creed that East and West shares, and it's wisdom from the scriptures. So it's light from light. Christ is the true light. So that's where the name came from. Thanks be to God. Yeah, and that's the closing wisdom drop right there. That's the closing wisdom. So awesome. That's awesome. Right. Check out Life from Light. Cara Dennis, thank you so much for sharing of your journey, a little bit about your testimony, and especially some insights into the state of healthcare. And we will be praying. All right. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks be to God. And if you enjoy content like this, we exhort you, please like, subscribe, share, check it out. And if you'd like to get involved with some life coaching, check out the Rich Dawn Life Coaching. It's at therichddawn.com. And God bless you. Very good. Thanks be to God. Yes.